Welcome to Legacy Unscripted, the podcast where sports and business collide. I'm your host, Russ Katzman, and here we skip the fluff and we get straight to the hustle. From athletes turned entrepreneurs to impact-driven business leaders, we dive into the wins, the lessons, and yes, the failures that make our legacies worth living. No scripts, no filters, just raw, real conversations to inspire you to stop dreaming about your legacy and to start living it. Now let's get into it. Today I welcome CEO of USA Bobsled and Skeleton, Aron McGuire. Aron, good morning.
Russ, great to see you. Thanks for having me on today. Looking forward to a exciting conversation.
As am I. Appreciate that. So why don't you just start by giving us an idea of who you are and how you got into USA Bobsled and Skeleton?
Sure. So I've been in the role as CEO of USA Bobsled and Skeleton for the past 5 years, but my path here was unexpected. Certainly a lot of twists and turns and a lot of exciting doors opened up in the process. I actually went to undergraduate school, University of Akron, to be a science teacher. So in an alternative universe or parallel universe, I'm teaching physics and earth science to high school students there and telling them to turn off their cell phones and pay attention and take notes. But growing up, I played a lot of different sports. I played soccer, ran track and field, was on the swim team, diving team, a lot of the non-mainstream sports like football, basketball, and baseball. Sure. And high energy kid, and my parents' philosophy was send them outside, run them around, let them get tired, come home, big meal, and go to bed and do your homework. And so really grew up playing sports from a young age. Yeah. And when I went into college, I decided to be a walk-on track and field athlete, and that was one of the sports I really focused in on and had been doing since middle school. And I was a pole vaulter and hurdler in high school, and so I felt like those would be my best chances to really focus in on and be successful. But after the first year, the coach pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Aron, you're a hard worker, athletic, dedicated, but to be honest with you, you're not good enough in either one of those two events. But we got a great event for you, and you just have to be average." And I thought, okay, just being average, that sounds interesting. And he said, it's called the decathlon, and you do 10 events, sprints, jumps, throws over 2 days. And like I said, the coach said, you just have to be average and you focus on your strengths and you bring up your weaknesses. And so my sophomore year got into the decathlon and really fell in love with it and found that the balance of managing my time between school, work, track and field, trying to focus on 10 events, and social time was for me a fun challenge. And ultimately excelled in decathlon and broke the school record and was voted team captain by my peers, which was exciting, and earned a scholarship. Yeah. And so because of that experience, I had been going to school for education and, like I said, to be a high school teacher. And one of the things I realized coming out of high school was some of my best teachers didn't necessarily teach exactly what was in the book. They taught what was in the book, but they also had a lot of conversations about life lessons and exposed students to things beyond calculus and physics and chemistry and history, but what was happening in the real world and challenged us to think and be independent thinkers and problem solvers and to work with each other. And so coming out of college, I realized I don't know that I have enough life experience to really be a great teacher. I can certainly teach what's in the book. So I had such a positive experience in track and field that I decided that I wanted to get into college coaching and be a track and field athlete. So I moved to Indianapolis. I was doing some coaching at university there, working with some post-collegiate athletes. And I was also training as well, and I'd continue that training. And I realized that I was never going to make an Olympic team or national team or international team in track and field. I was good, but not good enough. And that was a realistic realization for me. But I really wanted to stay in elite sport, and I had heard stories of bobsled and athletes making a transition from the sport of track and field into the sport of bobsled. And so I didn't know if kids grew up around bobsled tracks and were competing in the sport since they're 5 years old, like most sports
Right.
at an elite level, or how one got involved. And so I reached out to the national governing body and asked the question: how does one get involved in bobsled? And they said, well, a majority of our athletes are part of what we call talent transfer, and they come from other sports. So they'll play football, play soccer, play track, run track and field, volleyball, softball, and they're just really good all-around athletes. And then they make that transition, typically in their early 20s after college graduation, into the sport. And so that really got me excited. And I said, this sounds really cool. I've got a track and field background. This could be perfect. And so they invited me out to the Olympic Training Center in Lake Placid, New York, home of 2 Olympic Games, and had a chance to go to the Olympic Training Center. And for a week long, basically learn everything there is about the sport of bobsled.
Wow.
And before going there, I did some serious research, rented Cool Runnings and watched it about 6 times, and really paid attention. It was a movie that I'd watched as a kid, and while there's some Disney magic and it's a comedy, there are some truths behind some of the things in the movie, and so it is grounded in what's really part of the sport. And so I went to Lake Placid, went to Olympic Training Center, and my thought was, in worst case scenario, I have a cool experience at the Olympic Training Center trying out for the bobsled team. Best case scenario, I make a national team or potentially represent the United States internationally. And so went to Lake Placid. They called it a rookie camp.
Yeah.
And during the week, it was education, information about the sport, but also testing. They were testing our sprint, vertical jump, Olympic lifts, squat, strength. And at the end of the week, they invited myself and 2 other athletes to go train with the national team, who is currently training in Calgary, Canada, at a track there. And so went to Calgary, spent several weeks training with the national team, and that first year was invited to compete on the national team. And we competed in Italy, Germany, Switzerland, France, Austria,
Wow.
Canada, and the United States. And so spent the next three seasons competing on the team, competed at world championships. I missed the Olympic team, didn't make the Olympic team, but had overall an amazing experience. And being exposed to Europe, Canada, and representing the United States, wearing red, white, and blue, a jersey, a speed suit that said USA, was an incredible experience for me. And that was a pivotal moment for me, and one that I realized I want to stay in Olympic sport. Mm-hmm. And this is where my focus needs to be, really. And so at the time I was living in Indianapolis, and when I decided to make the transition out of being a bobsled athlete and focusing on my professional career, just so happened that USA Track and Field, the national governing body for track and field, was based in Indianapolis. And so I applied for a position there, and ultimately was offered a position, accepted it, and it was at the manager of international teams. So I was responsible for all the logistics of getting USA athletes from the United States over to Europe, to Asia. We were just getting ready for the 2008 Olympic Games in Beijing, China. So spent a lot of time in Asia, Central, South America, and then a few trips to the Middle East and Africa for the World Cross Country Championships. And so I was, like I said, responsible for really creating a positive environment, supportive environment where athletes can travel, represent the United States, feel safe and comfortable, and reduce that stress so they can really focus in on competing, training and competing. And I had the chance to do this for about 7 years. And during that time, from an administrative position, going back and recognizing that I didn't make an Olympic team as an athlete, that probably fueled some of the fire for me to stay involved. And so from an administrative standpoint, led the track and field team to Beijing, China, and then 2012 in London at the Olympic Games, and then a number of world championships, indoor, outdoor, junior, cross-country championships, Pan American Games in between.
Sure.
And so during that time, just exposed to a lot of different challenges, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different personalities, with that same core mission to support athletes, to represent the United States, to create this environment for them to be in a position to achieve their goals. Mm. And so after 2012, I decided that it was time to start looking around for a new challenge. And I'd been traveling quite a bit. I'd spent between 4 and 5 months a year on the road, which was incredible when someone else is paying the bill and you're going to Japan or Qatar or Brazil. Again, seeing the world was just incredible and eye-opening. And in 2013, a position in Colorado Springs, being the director of the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. And this is a training center that was very similar to the one in Lake Placid. The one in Lake Placid was very winter-focused. The training center in Colorado Springs was very summer-focused. And so it is a 35-acre, almost like a university. There's housing, there's dorms for housing for up to 500 athletes at a time. There's a dining hall that's feeding all these athletes on a daily basis. We hear about the number of calories that Michael Phelps would put away on a daily basis. So it wasn't just quantity of food, but quality of food
Sure.
as well. Venues, so an aquatic center, a velodrome for cycling, boxing rings, wrestling, mats, fencing. And so had a chance to work at the Olympic Training Center, lead the Olympic Training Center, taking that same philosophy of how do we create a positive environment, supportive environment for athletes to really focus on being their best. And so after 6 years in that role, the opportunity to step into the CEO role of USA Bobsled and Skeleton came up, and I thought it'd be pretty incredible to go full circle, being an athlete, having that athlete's perspective, taking all the lessons that I had learned along the way to coming back to USA Bobsled and Skeleton. And so, as I mentioned, I've been in this role for about 5 years now.
Wow. That's an incredible journey. It's interesting because the more individuals that I talk to that are in kind of the sports and athletics, even fitness type of industries, a lot of times they are that former athlete that wants to find some way to stay in that, right? It's become part of their identity. They want to carry on some way in sport, whether that be in the administrative side, whether that be in teaching the younger kids and coaching, whether that be just, pickleball as they grow old themselves, right? Some way to continue to be an athlete, and it's just becomes part of their identity. So it's such a great journey. A little jealous of all the global travel. That's incredible. The places you've seen. Did you, out of curiosity, anything you collect when you travel like that? Anything you bring home all the time from places you go?
I don't necessarily have one thing. You talk to some people and they collect mugs
Sure.
from around the world, or shot glasses, or I typically would pick up one or two small items that I could travel home with. And so I do have a box that is full of items from around the world there, and we like to open up every now and again, and sit down with our kids who are 6 and 9 and talk about each of the items and get the globe out and kind of show them where I got them.
Yeah. My son was young when I was doing a lot of travel around the globe, and I would bring home the currency for him. And so he's got a whole, box of currency stuck in a drawer somewhere now that he's older, but box of currency. And he used to like to look at the coins and the paper and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool.
Cool.
Talk to me about the administrative side. I'm sure, obviously you've got the sport, and we could talk for hours around kind of the sport. And by the way, for all the kids out there who are younger than 30, Cool Runnings, Jamaican bobsled team. I think it was filmed, I just checked, in 1993. So, go back, watch the movie. It sounds from you like it's fairly true to life.
There are parts of it, not all of it. There's, like I said, there's some Disney magic involved. And yeah, it's based on a true story, which is incredible. And the Jamaican bobsled team competing at the Olympic Games, and some of those guys are still involved with the Jamaican bobsled team. So, like you said, there's a lot of athletes that have an amazing experience being an athlete, and that is part of their DNA and who they are. And so they look at those opportunities in the future to give back to the next generation of athletes.
Yeah. No, that's tremendous. So talk to me then about the lessons that you learned through the earlier parts of your journey, right? As you were, in track and field, just starting to get into bobsled and kind of learning the business side of the sport, right? The business behind the game, as I like to call it, right? Tell me some of the key lessons that popped out of that for you that you're applying now.
I'll say a couple of the lessons that I really recall. One was taking notes on a daily basis. My first event that I took on within track and field was the World Indoor Championships in Moscow, Russia. Mm-hmm. And I remember going there, and there's always this preparation phase where you're planning, you're putting everything together, you're shipping out uniforms to the athletes, you're making sure that they have flights, they're coordinating housing, working with security. And I remember 3 months out having a list of things that I needed to do. And as I got closer, 2 months out, I was checking things off, but that list got longer. Oh, yeah. 1 month, the list was longer, and it seemed like I was never going to get ahead of this list and take care of everything. But a lot of late nights and weekends, I eventually got everything prepared as best I could to leave. And I do remember taking off and taking off in the flight, and there was a sense of just, I wouldn't say relaxing, but the tension was gone, because I moved from really the planning phase to now it's time to execute and really support the team. And that was a transition that always sticks out in my mind, and one that always hit me, where whenever we were taking off, no matter where we were going, there was just kind of this change. Mm-hmm. And okay, now it's time to get stuff done. And the World Championships are for indoors is over 2 weekends. And I remember every night staying up late thinking about what was potentially going to happen the next day and trying to anticipate it, and not having much experience specifically with the track team and at World Championships. You're trying to anticipate all these different scenarios. Sure. And you can just run yourself ragged. So there's some things you can anticipate, but some things you can't think about every potential scenario and run through it in your head. And so that's when I realized that I need to take notes of throughout the day of what went well and what would I do differently the next time. And I also realized that I wanted to rely on philosophies and start to put together my own personal set of leadership philosophies and decision-making philosophies. And I started writing down ideas as well. And one of the philosophies for me was understanding what was urgent, what was a priority. And if there were things that were coming up, the food wasn't good, transportation was unreliable. Yep. Those were urgent, and those were high priorities. If athletes were coming up and they're saying, "Hey, I got a blue USA shirt, but I really wanted the red USA shirt," I realized, okay, that's not necessarily urgent or a priority, and so you've got to treat everything a bit differently. And so, starting to put together my own personal philosophies allowed me to react and respond and make decisions, as opposed to trying to think through every potential scenario and think about what I might do in those scenarios. And so that helped me rely on those philosophies, those guidelines to help make decisions quicker, more consistently, and things that were true to my core values.
Sure.
And so that was a big learning that I took away from that first event. And then when I got home, I put together all my notes of my daily notes of what worked well and what would I do differently next time. And so I started a document that I carried through my entire time at USA Track and Field, and it just grew. And so things that I hadn't thought about, hadn't anticipated, but realized, it would be smart to bring 20 extra pairs of socks because athletes show up and they lose their socks. I was able to add to my checklist for the next event, and I brought 20 pairs of socks. And when someone showed up to the track and forgot socks, I had a pair of socks ready for them. And so that document grew throughout my time. And because of that checklist of what would I do differently next time, I was able to put more things in place, and the events went smoother. And I was, again, able to anticipate more needs and more requests ahead of time. Now there's always going to be a wrench thrown in the machine there, and there's always going to be some sort of unique challenge that comes up that you can never anticipate. A flat tire in a van going to the competition, someone getting the flu, or somebody's flight being canceled. But one of the things I did realize is that when everything goes smooth and according to plan, it feels really good, but you don't learn much. You're just executing it, and it means you've prepared very well, which is great. But I did realize that when things don't go according to plan, that's when I have the best opportunity to learn and identify, okay, what would I do differently next time?
Yeah, no, I love that. And the taking notes, I mean, and this is probably old school, literally taking notes as you go, right?
Yes, yeah, paper and pencil, and
pencil.
Now I've got notes in my phone that links to my computer, but at the time it really was old school. I had a pad of paper and just jotting things down whenever I had a chance.
Well, and I think there's a lesson in that too, right? Because people ask me all the time. I have clients ask me all the time, what's the best productivity tool? What productivity tools should I be using? Where should we start with this? And quite honestly, I tell them, see that pen in your hand, the paper in front of you? Let's start there, right? And once you get to a point where you have a predictive system, one that you do all the time, you write down the same type of things all the time, maybe you're tagging it with little notes and that kind of stuff the same way, then we can move that into a productivity system on your phone, right? But recognize that the phone is as much a distraction half the time as it is everything else, right? And computers the same way, right? We get notifications, we all get them, we get distracted by them, something pops up, and we go off on a tangent when we were just in there to write a note down, or we were just in there to check out an appointment or something. So starting with the pen and paper, I mean, there's nothing better than that. And then when you find something that's predictable and consistent, then find a productivity tool that works for you, right?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'll tell you, I still have a pad of paper and a pencil that sits next on my desk at all times, and always taking notes. And I need to make sure I do this. It's either checklists or notes or things I need to take care of in the future.
Well, and I tell everybody to do that as well. I've got my own sitting right there because I call that my parking lot, right? Mm-hmm. It's that, something pops in I'm here having a conversation with you, something pops in my head that I don't want to forget. But if I just leave it in my mind while I'm talking to you, it's going to sit there and keep reminding me, right? It's sitting in that short-term memory. So jot it down in the parking lot, get it out of my head so I can come back to concentrating on what we're talking about.
Yeah. No, I think that's extremely valuable. And I recall starting my first week at USA Bobsled and Skeleton, and I had a pad of Post-it notes. And so whenever ideas came up, I'd take it and stick it on the wall. Yeah. And after about the first month or so, I had 60 Post-it notes, and it looked like one of those FBI looking for the murderer, connecting the dots and everything. And I still have those Post-it notes, and I eventually organized them all and identified, okay, what are some of the short-term goals, the things we need to take care of right away? Yep. what are some of our midterm goals that we need to take care of as an organization in the next 3 to 6 months, and what are some bigger picture goals that we need to take care of in the next year or two. And one of the things I really focused in on was not only doing the short-term goals or the long-term goals, but making sure that there's kind of a top three in each category that we're constantly working towards. And that way we're getting some quick early wins in the first month, the first 90 days. We've got some midterm goals that we're working towards and slowly accomplishing. And then realizing, some of these things we can't do in the next few weeks or next few months, but they're critically important to the organization. And these are things that we need to start working on over time and setting ourselves up for. And so it is a lot of fun to look back through that stack of Post-it notes that I started during the first 3 and 6 months of my role as CEO, and thinking that seeing some of those and realizing that back at that time, it was, some of them were people looked at that, that's crazy. That'll never happen. We're too kind of stuck in this process or this way of thinking, or that's just too big of a project. And looking back and realizing not only did we accomplish either a significant change within the organization or finish a project or make a new partnership, but it's now routine, and people can't think of, really, staff and athletes can't think of any other way that we've done it. And so now it's taken this significant challenge and made it normal, normalized it.
Yeah, I love that. There's going to be so many good nuggets coming out of this conversation. Because now you talk about those short, midterm, and long-term goals. We get into that three horizons philosophy, right? Where as I'm talking to people, and this goes back, I think people have talked about it for years. I think there's some images of Zuckerberg in like 2012 to 2015 and 18, something like that, where you can see the stuff that was in Horizon 3 has now come into 2 and then ultimately into 1 and underneath the umbrella of Facebook, et cetera. But the big thing people miss when they start making those goals is what you just said, which is we need to work on all of the goals all the time, at least a little bit, right? You don't want to get to the end of Horizon 1 and say, okay, well, now it's time to start on the midterm goals, because those are now your short-term goals, right? My thought on it, I always tell people 80-20-10, or excuse me, 80-15-5 or 70-20-10, something along those lines, to where, you're spending the bulk of your time on that first horizon, those short-term goals. But don't forget, let's make a couple phone calls. Let's put a couple meetings on the calendar to talk about those midterm ones. And don't forget about the long-term goals, because you never know when stuff's going to pop up. Let's get some definition around those now, so we have our eyes open as we go forward as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I often think about it as home projects. And you think about home projects, and I think we've all been there at some point where we say, oh, let's do some landscaping outside. And then you kind of start the landscaping, you think, oh, you know what? The bathroom really needs to be redone. We need to change the sink, change the lighting, paint the walls. And then you start that project, and then you think, oh, you know what? It would be fun to update the kitchen. And next thing you know, you had these massive projects that are all partially done, and you kind of start to lose momentum and start to be overwhelmed. Sure. And I think about it myself as sometimes you need to think about the landscaping, think about painting the bathroom walls, and then changing out the burnt out light in the garage. And changing that burnt out light sometimes gives you the momentum and to get moving on some of those other projects. But it's overwhelming to have massive projects that are all 80% done. Exactly. and not to the finish line. And you need to set yourself up in some sort of timeline where you're chipping away and you're checking things off that list, and that helps you eventually do the landscaping, redo the bathroom, and redo the kitchen.
Very cool. So I know when we talked previously, you mentioned that there's a nonprofit piece of this governing body that it's an interesting twist to what I don't think people really tie to sports and athletics. So give me an idea of how the nonprofit side of this kind of influences the way you behave versus what you might have seen before in a corporate setting.
So the structure for the Olympic and Paralympic Games globally is you have the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, that oversees the games every 4 years. And they're doing quite a lot of other projects around the world where they're leveraging sport to have a positive influence internationally. Each country that's involved at the Olympic Games, and there's over 200 of them, each have a National Olympic Committee. And so for ours, we're one of only a few where it's the Olympic and the Paralympic Games within one organization. And so that's the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. Oftentimes in most countries, they're two separate organizations. But we see a lot of economies of scale, lots of benefits to combining the two. Two separate organizations, the IOC and the USOPC. And then taking it down a step, the next step down is looking at each of the individual sports. And so for each individual sports in the United States, there's a national governing body. And so USA Swimming, USA Track and Field, USA Wrestling, USA Boxing, USA Bobsled and Skeleton. And we're each independent 501c3 nonprofits. And so we do have a close partnership with the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. There's some level of oversight to make sure that we're operating properly. There's regular audits, financial audits, and compliance audits, similar to the NCAA in universities. But our goals as organizations are to promote the sports, provide opportunities for athletes to compete in those sports, and then develop athletes to ultimately represent the United States as best we can internationally and at the Olympic Games, and in some cases the Paralympic Games. And we're very much mission driven, and our funding model is very unique to other countries. Almost every other country around the world, their National Olympic Committee, and in turn their individual sport organizations, are government funded. That's where they get a bulk of their funding, either through taxpayer dollars or through the lottery. We're in a unique situation where Team USA, the USA athletes, the Olympic Committee, the national governing bodies don't receive any federal support. So no tax dollars go to support USA athletes. And so that is often, people often see athletes with USA across their chest, and they assume that they're government funded or tax funded. And so we rely heavily on a couple different areas. One is sponsorships. So corporate sponsorships are absolutely critical for us to do what we need to do. Individual donors. So people getting out their checkbook and writing a check to the Olympic Committee or to individual national governing bodies. And so for us, one of the things that I found is that really there's a lot of passion involved with those folks that are involved, whether they're coaches, administrators, and a lot of people have a tie back to the sport, but not everybody does. Our staff is a mixture between athletes who competed in the sport of bobsled or skeleton, and those that came from the outside and may not have any direct sport experience, and that creates a really good balance. But for us, we think about our mission, and we recognize that we're not necessarily here for a product or to sell a product. We don't have stocks, and I don't have shareholder prices. We're not trying to make anybody rich, but we focus on purpose over a product, and that purpose really is creating that positive environment, identifying what athletes need and what they want in order to be their very best. And Olympics is not I wouldn't say a sport, but an event that you start training the year before the Olympic Games. And I often get that question from people. They'll say, "Oh, the Olympics are next year. Is your team is the U.S. team starting to train?" And I say, "No. This is not we're going to get ready in the next few months. Yeah. This is a 4-year, 8-year, 12-year endeavor for many of our athletes." And they don't just do it part-time. It is a full-time focus for them. Some athletes can in some sports can be very successful financially. You think about skiing, you think about track and field, you think about swimming. There's a few athletes that are very successful, but most of the time, sports are a bit below the radar, other than when the Olympic Games take place. And there are World Cup events every year. There are World Championships every year. But there is something special about turning on the TV, and it's Olympic Games, and there's a lot of good hype around it, and so people do tune in, and so the athletes that are competing are often working part-time jobs. Some are trying to balance a full-time job just to do their sport, and to be their very best to compete against the rest of the world.
So the interesting thing of all this stuff you just finished talking about, that at least I find is a contrast to what most entrepreneurs and listeners are dealing with, is that purpose over product, right? I always talk to my clients, and it's all about, I do refuse to work with anybody that doesn't have a passion for what they're building, because you've got to have that passion, whether it's profit, nonprofit, doesn't matter. You've got to have that passion for building something. But in your case, that purpose over product has to be underpinning everything you do. How do you ensure that happens? How do you ensure that every new employee, anybody that starts working with you, has that same sense of purpose as what you carry forward?
Yeah, I would say that most people aren't getting involved to get rich. I think everybody that's involved could find a different job somewhere else that pays the bills, and even more so, and maybe provides a few more vacation days. But there is something that is extremely rewarding when you see athletes and you get to know them, which is part of the one of the amazing things is that every athlete comes through into the sports, different backgrounds, different regions of the country, different experiences, different social classes, and some come from very little background, some come from very privileged background, but they all have that same goal.
Sure.
And that is one of the things that brings together in an often very divided country of brings people together. Everybody can agree to support and cheer for Team USA. And when you get to know these athletes, and then you understand some of their challenges, and to see them overcome those challenges, that does drive that passion. And so when we're interviewing and identifying who's going to be part of our coaching team or our administrative staff, we are very selective, and there are a lot of people that want to get involved with sport, because there's a view of that it is very glamorous. You are traveling around the world all the time, and it's you're just jet setting and going to sporting events and cheering on the team.
Sure.
That's probably 3% of what we do, and the other 97% is behind the scenes of the things that nobody ever sees. And so you do turn on the Olympics, and it's the opening ceremony, and everybody's walking out, looks great, and matching Ralph Lauren gear and the flags out there, and you don't see all the work that goes into that moment. And so you have to be comfortable and okay working behind the scenes 97% of the time, and people not necessarily recognizing what you're doing, and even aware of everything that you do. But if you've done everything correctly, then you do get that moment where you've got an athlete or several athletes who are on the podium, and they're standing in that center spot, and they are playing the national anthem, and you see the flag go up, and that makes all the grunt work, all the roll the sleeves up and get the job done worth it. But that's not the only goal. There's a lot of athletes that will never have that opportunity, but they still accomplish things. They still make national teams. They still get in their first world championship event, or their first top 10, their first top 6, their first top 3.
Sure.
And those are all significant wins along the way. And knowing those athletes can be as significant as hearing the national anthem, getting a gold medal.
That's incredible. Yeah, it has a very utopian feel to being able to just live your purpose and serve that on a daily basis, regardless of what that means, right? You want to be connected to the sport, you want to be connected to the athletes, and you're able to do that on a daily basis and truly do what you love on a regular basis.
You do, and that is exciting, and sports is an interesting career path because it isn't a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. We had athletes today racing at 2 o'clock in the morning over in Europe, and I woke up to check the results, and
How'd they do?
it happens on the weekends, and doing press releases on the weekends, and so it's a lifestyle, and you balance it out, and so it never necessarily turns off. You don't necessarily shut things down at 5 o'clock every day, but you're also there are amazing opportunities again to travel the world, to be in person and get to know these individual athletes, and every 4 years the world stops and watches the Olympic Games, which is exciting.
Yeah, I've got to say, my wife is a huge fan of the Olympic Games, so we watch she will watch every minute of everything she can possibly see. I don't know if I can sit still quite that many hours, but it's incredible. Our DVR fills up during the Olympics. Doesn't matter winter, summer, doesn't matter. Our DVR gets filled. Even the trials now that they've started to broadcast the trials a little bit more. That we're getting into a little bit more too.
The Olympic and Paralympic Committee has really done a good job of helping define these stories and inform the viewer, the fans, of not just turn the TV on. It is fun, and one of the things I like about the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games is that you do get an opportunity to watch sports that you normally wouldn't ever watch: fencing, judo, badminton, archery. I just don't watch those during the rest of the year. Occasionally, I'll because I have friends that are involved,
sure,
I'll tune in and watch an event or watch results. But that's one of the great things about the Olympic Games is that you do get to showcase a lot of these different sports that are, again, under the radar most of the time. And the great thing about the Olympic Games is that you can turn on a game or a sport that you know nothing about, but you know immediately who to cheer for because they are representing the United States. And so the Olympic and Paralympic Committee has done a really good job of, you mentioned trials, showcasing those trials and highlighting those trials leading up to the games. And so as fans, you get a chance to not only know who to cheer for, but you know a little bit about those individual athletes or the teams themselves. And when you have that greater appreciation for who is competing, then you're that much more emotionally invested in the outcome of what happens there. So it really does create that narrative, and it's not just the opening ceremony, but it's the whole lead up to the opening ceremony, and then okay, let's see what happens.
Well, and I think the lesson here, and it's not to commercialize the stuff that you do, but to draw the parallel between that purpose and product, right? Yes, we're in it for a purpose, but the athletes truly are the product, right? And if you talk about corporate sponsorships, individual donors, they're looking for something that's going to give them exposure and something to tie to. And the more we can tell the backstory and people relate to that backstory, create that story brand, if you will, of something that's out there and that we are putting out in front of people and that people can attach to, that then creates the exposure that these sponsors and donors are looking for.
Agreed.
So talk to me then a little bit about some of the challenges you have. I mean, obviously, the culture, people are in it because they want to be in it and that kind of thing. That's spectacular. But I'm sure there's some days that are more challenging. Talk to me where the challenges are.
So I would say our biggest challenge is a financial challenge. Mm-hmm. And you think about sports and the cost of participation. And at the very top level, you have I gotta guess it's equestrian, because you have these $1 million horses that athletes are you've got to have a nice sizable bank account when you get into the sport of equestrian. Next, you have sailing, and you've got these $500,000 boats and expensive boats that are competing. And not too far from behind that is the sport of bobsled, because the sleds themselves can cost up to $100,000. Wow. We're shipping 10 to 12 massive sea containers from the United States to Europe and back again every year by air, and that's not inexpensive. And so the cost of participation in the sport has increased over the years. Um, and again, because we're a bit under the radar, we're fortunate to have some amazing sponsors. We have some sponsors that provide financial backing for us. So Raising Cane's, KOA, Under Armour are three of our premier partners that support the team financially. And then we also have some amazing partners that provide expertise. And so we have some great partners that help us build bobsleds. DeBow is out of North Carolina. They work in the auto industry, and they help us build the bodies of the sleds. We have a company that we partner with called Advance, and they work with the metal and the frame of the sled. And so they may not be providing cash to us, but they provide extremely valuable service and a service in helping us build sleds that the athletes compete in, and having a fast sled does provide a team and an athlete a competitive advantage. And so we do rely on partners that are extremely passionate. They bring that same passion to support USA athletes and be part of that excitement around the games. And so going back to the challenge is how do we take a finite set of resources or funding and ultimately maximize that to have the biggest impact on the team? And oftentimes we're going up against countries like Germany that may have 4 times as much, 5 times as much financial backing than we do. And so we know that we can't outspend some countries. Same goes for China. There's some significant financial backing. Russia, when they compete, government funded. And so we have to be extremely smart about how we spend every dollar or invest every dollar, because that is going to have an impact on the team. And when you look at the sport of bobsled and skeleton, the competitions can be won or lost by hundredths of a second. And so we're talking literally a game of inches, where each run that the team goes down, the track itself is a mile long. And during a regular season of World Cup events, it's a combined time of 2 runs. So it's a 2-mile race, essentially, 2-mile drag race.
Sure.
With a lot of twists and turns, going 90 miles an hour, pulling 3 to 5 G's of force. And then during the World Championships and Olympic Games, it's a combination of 4 runs. So it's a 4-mile race.
Sure.
And a hundredth of a second, 400ths of a second can be the difference between 5th and 6th and watching the podium ceremony, or 1st, hearing that national anthem and seeing your flag raised. And so while we're always looking for those hundredths of a second or tenths of a second, there's an endless number of great ideas. We talk to engineers, we talk to designers, we talk to sports science folks, and there are endless great ideas. Okay, hey, if you make this adjustment in the sled, it'll shave off 100th of a second. If you do this type of training with your athletes, you can get them 100th of a second faster. Yeah. But one of the things that we have to do is take all these great ideas, we just can't do them all, and narrow them down and say, okay, first of all, before we worry about 100th of a second, we've got to worry about actual seconds. And we need to make sure that the athletes have those fundamental, needs met: training environments, food, coaching.
Right.
Once we get those seconds, then we can shift over to tenths of a second. And that's the next priority. Okay, what are some things that we can really focus in on that will help us reduce tenths of a second? And so that could be how 4 bobsled athletes get into a sled running at the start, because you have the start, which is extremely critical. You have the drive, how the pilot gets down the track, and then you have the equipment. And so those tenths of a second could be how that team loads or gets in the sled. That tenth of a second could be how the pilot goes down the track. And then once you take care of those, then you have to focus on those hundredths of a second. And that could be the speed suit, the material that the athletes are wearing.
Sure.
And is one material faster than another material. Because if you just focus on these tenths of a second, you're never going to get competitive. And you really have to take all these great ideas that we have and then say, okay, what can we actually do? And then how do we prioritize them of biggest impact to now once we take care of the biggest impact, how do we make those little refinements that determine first and second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth?
Well, we saw that several Olympics ago. I forget whether it was 8 or 12 or one of those Summer Olympics where the swimming was shaving all sorts of records off because of the change in the material, right? They had different material, and all of a sudden all these records are falling because they were swimming in something different, right?
Yes. It's incredible how much technology plays in the sports. And you think about swimming's a great example. Well, they're in a pool, and how different could that be? And the materials of the swimsuits play a role, and then even the design of the pool itself.
Mm-hmm.
And when athletes are swimming, they're making wake and making waves, and the calmer the pool can be, they say the faster the water. And so they've designed pools to reduce those waves in order for athletes to have clean water. And that goes, that's every sport around the world is looking individually. Athletes and teams are looking, how do we get better? But then the sport themselves, International Federation that oversees those sports, are looking at safety innovation, but they're also looking at performance innovation. How can they make tracks faster for track and field, pools faster for swimming?
Yep.
And it's incredible, but it does go back to those priorities of if we just focus on these, then we're not going to get the job done. And so we've got to really go from those high priorities down to those small refinements.
Well, and it continues to amaze me. I mean, the average person, we watch these games and watch stuff happen, and we can't fathom the amount of stuff that goes into that. I've got an individual who's a good friend of mine who I hope to have him on the pod here, sometime in the next couple of months. He's a turf professor for the University of Tennessee, but he also does work for the NFL Players Association and some stuff for MLB and that kind of stuff. And him talking about the way that they'll bring him in when they're putting new turf into a baseball field, and the bounce of the ball, and it has to be within certain parameters, and so they different types of turf and all that kind of stuff, just depending on how the ball's going to bounce and the way it's going to come off the field, so they build the team around the ability to get the ball off a certain unbelievable all of that stuff that's out there. So I would imagine, though, you reach a point where it costs as much to get from tenths of a second to hundreds of a second as it does to shave those first few seconds off. That diminishing returns on your investment. So I can't imagine the amount of money that must go into that. Other than that,
it's a lot. There certainly is, and for us, it's going back to one of the challenges is how do we increase that revenue?
Sure.
And so every new dollar that we bring in, that allows us to do new things, to take on, do some new testing, be innovative, recruit athletes and support athletes that much better.
And that's what I was going to say. Other than that, on the spending side, I would imagine you have some challenges in finding new sponsorships, finding new donors that are ready to jump on board and getting that exposure, especially outside of the Olympic years. It's one thing to jump on board when the world's going to be watching, but it's those in-between years that you've got to have the biggest challenges.
Agreed.
Got it. Well, I think we'll probably get ready to wrap it up, but are there any questions that I didn't ask that you'd like to bring forward? Anything you want to mention before we jump off?
No, we're in an exciting time. We've got Italy coming up in about a year and a half. So the Winter Games will be right around the corner. As with every Olympic Games, there's always some sort of controversy that takes place before the games. Yeah. And the controversy right now is, will the track in Cortina, Italy be built in time? Mm. So they had an old track that was being retrofitted and rebuilt. And they're literally right now construction crews in Italy building a track. And so if the track is built in time, the team will be in Cortina, Italy. If it isn't, the backup location is Lake Placid, New York. And so there is a possibility that we might be competing on home soil, home ice in a year and a half, which would be really exciting. It'll be exciting if we're in Italy. It'll be exciting if we're back in the United States. And then as we look forward to the future, we've got the summer games taking place in LA in 28. So that's right around the corner. And then not too far after that in 2034, the winter games will be returning to Utah, Salt Lake City and Park City. And so for the Olympic and Paralympic Games, a lot of exciting things to look forward to. Huge success in Paris. And so we're looking to continue to recruit athletes from football, from track and field, from baseball, from soccer, from volleyball into the sport of bobsled and skeleton. And then we're always trying to generate revenue. So if there's any of your listeners, viewers that want to become a sponsor of the USA team, you're welcome to reach out to us, and we'd love to have a conversation and have you be part of our team and be part of the team behind the team.
Oh, that's exciting stuff. Appreciate it, Aron. Appreciate you jumping on and joining us. So that's a wrap for this episode of Legacy Unscripted. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't just sit on it. Take action today to build your future. Make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. And if you've got a story to share or want to connect, you know where to find me. Until next time, keep it real, keep it bold, and keep living your legacy.